Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Tell me about the retreat. How was that in the end?
I was offered a month, maybe more, to spend time with my creative practice in the Portuguese countryside in this incredible space. But with other work commitments, I decided to do just a week. So it was a really interesting situation because how I would manage to create something in a short amount of time and how I manage my expectations of that. So it was really, my aim really was to find something really new. And I guess even saying that was really new because I have such high expectations and I'm a super planner. I'm a micromanager. I like to journal through everything. I like to have my aims and objectives. One of the reasons that I decided to do the week was the other artists were musicians. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to work in that space and just be in my zone with sort of music around me, and just went with the work that I've been creating for the last year and a half, keeping clear on what the purpose of that was, but also being really open to how that would feel, because I've just worked in my studio for the last year and a half solidly, and I created so much work last year. I was like, what will happen if I just go away on my own? So obviously, that's why I called it a retreat residency, because when a formal residency, you'd probably be with other artists, or at least you'll have different facilities, you'll have like maybe workshops. It's a lot more structured, so very open. So other than creating a structure around journaling, meditation, walks, being in nature, it was very much about, okay, what happens to the work when I allow it to breathe, when I take it into a bigger space, and how does it look? How does it feel? How does it allow me to co-create with that space? So it was really beautiful in that way, because it was an exercise almost to sort of manage my expectations. And I took so many materials and things for lots of different processes, which was great. So if the inspiration came, I could project. If the inspiration came, I had canvases to paint on. And I invited two different creatives, I think I could call both of them creatives, women to model for me, because a lot of my work has been around the female body. So that was really interesting. And it became about feeling into the work in a different space, but also sharing it and understanding how other people were interpreting it, and bringing it out into the world. It's almost like when we're stuck in our homes all day working on our projects, and then we go outside and we're like, wow, I breathe differently, I feel differently.
And just that feeling of walking into this big cavern of space and hearing the noises of people working on various things behind various partition walls was just, I've never forgotten it. And I always get the same feeling when I work into kind of big collaborative spaces. And it's just something, I'm not in a position to have the luxury of a regular access to such a space at the moment, being based in my garden studio. But it has given me this awareness of the importance of recognizing your needs in that regard and when you might need to change it up.
Yeah, it's super, super important. And also, we've all seen the statements and understand and appreciate how important it is to just, obviously we're talking about your example is talking about, somewhere, a new environment where it's almost kind of making your mind tick in a different way, and it's connecting with certain, maybe inspiring different ideas or just this different energy that you're feeling. And with mine, it was really diving into that space of not almost allowing yourself to not do anything, because a lot of the work that we do is very internal. I think we end up in problems when we're like, oh, I didn't do anything today because I don't have anything to show for it. So yeah, I think it's a release, it's sort of letting go.
I don't know what the very roots of it are, maybe industrial revolution and kind of working on the clock, temporal side of it, which is interesting. Perhaps that's a byproduct of that kind of that need to show something. I'm still guilty of it. Some days I'm great at accepting that today I just needed to clear my mind. And that doesn't involve laziness or sitting there, but it might be research, it might be reading, it might be just digesting things. But you have to do all that stuff. Otherwise you just stagnate and end up looping in these kind of short-term ideas of productivity. But really all it tends to do is stagnate, I find, when you get trapped in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I spoke about this a lot last summer, actually. And it's like, how about we just learn to define work in a different way? Because the way that we work, the way that we think is about conversation. It's about absorbing inspiration. It's about reconnecting with your materials, tidying, just being in your space, feeling like you're not just showing up and you're diving straight into something, because we need that space for mistakes to happen or new thoughts to happen, or just to be able to process a project that landed yesterday. Or it's I mean, I guess I can talk to that a little bit more because of my moving to Lisbon and living at a very different pace. I work with one artist who's great. She's like, I want to be in the slow productivity movement, and I'm just so for it. And my goal this year is to really, even though we've just been talking about doing everything at once, it's just like, how can I really build a relationship, a really much deeper relationship with what I'm doing, by just honoring that one thing and my connection with that, without, and then that might even be for the whole day or for 4 hours. And that could be just how I feel about my materials, how I feel about my paints, how I feel about this activity that I'm doing. And it just becomes something that a term I've been using a lot, which is kind of like, we have rituals rather than tasks and routines, and how we can make things feel like we're having a relationship with it, because that's how we build it. That's how we can kind of nurture it and cultivate something that is a little bit more sacred, for want of a better word. And then when we hit things like resistance or defeat, it sort of helps us navigate those relationships, so to speak. In deep already.
when you feel that drop off in love and that kind of reluctance to work on a thing, there's usually something in that. Those instincts are generally pretty correct.
Yeah, and if you have built that slow relationship, let's call it that for now, with the task, with the space, then you're able to read the best way to navigate changes within that, or to grow it, or as we say, I use the term stepping stones or supporting characters. If we've got a piece of artwork or a project that's kind of like we're fighting with it, and it's like it's not a good fight. It's like, okay, I'm exhausted. It's not going anywhere. And it's like, well, maybe I've got enough from this to take to the next thing that's going to support the main characters.
I think that's interesting, and that kind of leads me into this idea that I've developed in the last couple of years since, and it's the kind of characters and the supporting characters. I love that because in the last few years since becoming a parent, I had to make a conscious decision to recognize that I've always been a very social person. I've always had a lot of people in my life, and I've worked hard to maintain all of those relationships. But what that couldn't look like post-twin parenthood was being in touch with everybody all of the time. And what I started to frame that as was this being my story, much like everybody's life is their story. But then isn't there something lovely about the idea that some people come and go at various times, much like minimal but not necessarily any less impactful characters in a story? It diminishes that kind of guilt that we tend to saddle ourselves with in that way. And I guess the same thing does apply to what you just described there about seeing artworks and creative endeavors in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at it in that relationship, definitely, because they have different purposes. As I said, it's almost like a stepping stone. And there might be this, it's just that line of inquiry. It's very wriggly and wavy and can go off piste. Like when I'm thinking about my process or supporting artists, which is great through the mentoring process, because you can allow artists to go all the way to the edges, go completely crazy, go completely off in the clouds, but we know that they can support them come down, and we can sort of ground that experience and review that. But yeah, it's there's going to be a lot of mistakes and weird things and unusual things, and that's part of that play that we talk about, isn't it? And it's, if we're expecting everything to be constant and right and leading us in that one direction, then we're missing a trick.
We're interconnected with something that involves nature, involves the unseen, and I think if you have to make time and space to feel. I believe that we are, to some degree, conduits, and these things come, they take on energy and life energy at certain times, and there's resonance. Sometimes they can't have that resonance. They can't be ready. Like the latest book that I've done was a 5-year hiatus. I wrote half a manuscript. My confidence just completely dropped, completely went off a cliff in a moment. Weird, literally halfway through a sentence on a train, I remember it well, and kind of just closing my laptop really solemnly and going, this project has died in this moment. It was a really weird feeling. 5 years later, it literally burst out of my unconscious while I was washing up at Christmas. And what I realized with hindsight and life experience is that it needed that 5-year gap to be ready. I had to live 5 years life to be ready to write what I knew I needed to write, and it was then when it started, it never stopped. There was such a flow and a serendipity about it, and the thing was ready. But I'd accepted that it might never be ready, and that was that, and it was fine, and walked away from it.
I love that. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
because and that's amazing story anyway, and I'm a great believer, and we've talked about this a lot in the past about whether you want to call it a sabbatical, whether you call it a creative block, whether you call it like just time out. There's so many things that we need. I think our mind knows that we need more time. We need other stuff. We're not going to push it. And I just I'm almost coming to my 5 years of, stepping off the full-time creative life and dedicating myself to helping others, because I'm learning a lot.
I thought about this morning. We first spoke for the first time we did a podcast 10 years ago, which is really interesting.
Wow.
And back then, I think safe to say you would have still been going on full-time illustrator at that point, commercial predominantly.
Yeah.
So what were the kind of activation points in because it makes sense to me, just having had a limited amount of conversations with you. One of the biggest things that I associate with you is sensitivity and warmth and empathy. I don't know you well enough to say that with absolute confidence, but I do tend to trust my reading of that. Therefore, it makes absolute sense that you are now where you are mentoring. But, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because when we talked the first time in Brooklyn, was that our first meeting? And I think it was September, maybe 2015, and we talked about my romanticized idea of being a fine artist and the pet rat. And we're talking about I guess I should explain that, because that sounds a bit odd, just dropping that in. This idea of being, and I guess it's just what we're talking about. It's like this internal job, this inside job, that everything that I need to create is inside of me. So I guess I didn't have the words then, but I had this romanticized idea that I would have this flat and have a kettle, and it would be really minimal. It would just be me with my paints, me having this conversation with what I wanted to bring into the world. So I was very passionate with being a fine artist, and really struggled coming out of university, and had my first big experience of creative block. After coming out of that, journaling and all of the practice that have really sort of become a constant for me now and support the mentoring. I was like, well, what am I going to do? I mean, I had a creative block after coming out of the degree. So from there, I had no work skills. I was in London trying to work out what the next stage was, and went from one rubbish job to another job, from cleaning to telephone exchange, kind of odd jobs, and just really struggled with, why am I here? What's the point in this? And I ended up in a great PR job, and I was like, no, this is terrible. And was very lucky to find a course which merged fine art and public art and community art, which I taught. It was a post diploma, so they used it as a sort of tap on from my fine art degree. And within a year, I was running the course, which was amazing. And they said something similar to me. And they said, yeah, okay, so maybe you don't have any experience, but you have such empathy, sensitivity, and compassion. We'd really like to mentor you to help the community paint murals, work with women in refugee groups in Barnet. And so I did that for 6 years, and it really, really supported my ambitions, because when you have creative block, or when I had creative block especially, it was like, who am I now if I can't create? Who am I, and what have I got to give? What have I got to do? It became it was very, very, very difficult time through the work that I was doing, and this love I had being part of a community, this amazing power that art had to make people happy. It got people out of their homes, gave people confidence, and it was so transformative. And it allowed me to reset, or at least reconnect with the idea of ambition, you know. I was like, okay, this is great. I can do this, and created a big show. I curated a show at the space and within the centre in Bromley by Bow, and yeah, it was really beautiful. From that, I started drawing. I had some trouble with my health, so I just started drawing. Next thing, I'm working with Illustration Limited. They're supporting me after I've done some big sort of PR stunts in the street art world, where there were there was very little visibility of women in that space. And yeah, it's a long story, really, isn't it? So I think for me, it's always about what's the next thing, because Misled was really created to see if I could do it again. And I did it really well and got to have an amazing, amazing career. But I really wanted to come back to the idea of, well, what do I want? Because I loved the illustration career, but you know, I was very good at giving people what they wanted, and I was very good at sort of adapting and feeling relevant and resonating with people and creating ideas that sort of matched briefs. But it was like, okay, well, what do I want now? And that sort of formed this big change of moving out of London, because I couldn't even read a book there, to really understanding that I didn't know what the next steps were. So moving here was, okay, let's just find some white space, noise free, even though Lisbon's really loud, by the way. Noise free space where I can have more than a pit stop. When I got here, I was just running on adrenaline. I was just running on momentum. And for me, the mentoring was very similar to me finding a community again, like I did in East London. And through the reputation and visibility that I was very lucky to have through my Misled freelance business, I was able to pick up and align with some really amazing artists that are willing to trust me to support them, allowing me to really lean into my skills and grow them and expand on them, work with new teachers, work with more coaches and mentors along the way. And it just kind of allowed me to, we use the clocking in and clocking out. I use that a lot. You mentioned that earlier. Sort of like clock out a bit and just go, okay, let's just have another life. It just felt like a really natural progression, and it's allowed me the space and the finances to work with an amazing art mentor the last year and a half and really look at my practice and still be in play mode. I have to stop myself from going, no, you don't need to do a solo show yet. You don't need to do this. It's just like, just enjoy the process. But I'm learning so much from the artists that I work with, and that's helping too.
One of the things that I want to discuss within that talk is the role of jeopardy, and that kind of, seeking that a mixture of discomfort, but also just something that just scares you a little bit, and making a big move like that not only forces you to be in the moment and to be really responsive and to really listen and pay attention to your instincts and your feelings, but it's such a feeling of triumph when you come through the other side of that and you realize that you've got the inner strength to make such a big change and to do something that you're really feeling. That's very, very important. And comfort zones can be very dangerous for that, if you
Oh
get
my
caught in
gosh,
the
yeah.
same web.
Yes, comfort zones definitely, and I'll do that. I think it's part of my brain. It's the way that I am. I need to kind of rattle the cage, so to speak, because we're in a society, I think, where like the first we're just so comfortable, aren't we? We're in this kind of quick click access time in our lives where we don't have to wait for things. We don't have to. Um, really, and also there's a lot of the way that we've been brought up as well from schooling, and I know that you've spoken to some amazing guests around this. It's like there's no sort of third perspective. It's either right, it's either wrong. It's very binary, and risk taking is really, really tough anyway. And, for me as well, I'm getting to this point now where it's all really, really stable. When I started doing the mentoring, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do an after mentor, I'm going to do a talk, I'm going to guest for this person. It's like, okay, well, just just do the parts that are really, really, that you really, really love and that are stable. And then, build from there. But I was just so excited because it was the first time that I was able to make money on my terms without, the back and forth of a brand and it felt like it was so hands-on. I wasn't working with a team, I was working with one person. I could see the change happening. That's really, really beautiful.
Like, how did you build the trust? And I'm sure, you wouldn't have gone into it without the trust that you could do it well, but invariably in anything new, confidence being about momentum and about proving to yourself that you can do it well. How did you feel going into the first kind of sessions with your first clients? And when did you start to feel validation coming from them that you were doing this well?
Okay, so it's worth saying that I was running free masterclasses. So I was running I was running for like 150, 200 people, just off the bat, just from my Instagram and my newsletter. So I was already able to really sense check where people were, how people were feeling. And what I was realizing is that no matter where we are in the career or on our journey, shall we say, and what discipline, we all want the same things. So for me, I started with just ad hoc. So what I mean by that is I would just work with artists for a low rate for just an hour. So it would mean that I had a little bit of grace and we could feel it out. And then through working with lots of amazing coaches and mentors, no one art based, but really, really incredible people. I got to use different parts of my brain, and it was almost like it felt that there was a sort of right or wrong. There was no, it was very colourful, but there was no, I knew through being in the trenches, I knew what it felt like to go through deep creative block whilst going through grief, whilst grieving my identity and the loss of a future or an understanding of who I was going to be in the world. So it was giving people permission to feel like that was really important. And many of the artists that work with me just said, I really want to work with you because, I've seen you since I was in school. I've grown up with you. I've so admired the way that your career has run. You've done so many different things. That resilience shows up and that, learning on the job, should we say. Things would happen just on calls. I could just feel the energy. It was very emotional for me because I'd spent 15 years being, regarded as quite a highly regarded, a notable illustrator, but the testimonials that I got from just working with someone for an hour or 2 sessions and that's what kept me going. We have friends, we have family, but it's the one person that can give you a real step up. That's their only goal, is to champion you, to support you, and to reflect back to you exactly who you are. Yeah, it's such a gift. I know I'll always do this, take different shape or form. But
and I'm interested in if you share this because I would put a lot of money on the answer being yes. But since as long as I can remember, I have cared inherently about people. full stop. I cared about why the person on the bus might have been shouting, or the person in the street might have been upset or having an argument. There's always been something about me that has enabled people I've just met to open up and share everything with me. And I know now from all the sort of reading and life observation that I've made that a lot of that comes down to my being a highly sensitive person. 40% of all of humans are highly sensitive. Probably 30% in the middle are somewhere in between, and the other 30% are not that sensitive. And society simply wouldn't work if we didn't have that balance, because we need pragmatists. People like you and I need pragmatists to pull us back in sometimes, to help us to not be overwhelmed. So I guess my question is, have you always felt that same way?
That's so funny. I've got a couple. Yeah, absolutely. I am, and I've seen that through my mum. And I think my mum was a really big part, had a big part to play in. I'm going to say something which is really sad. I'm going to say it without crying. I remember sitting with her, and I think she was in her 60s, and we were going through a photo album, and she is someone that has the power to just walk in a room and the whole space lights up. It's beautiful. And it took her till that moment to look back, even photos when she was 40, when she was a young mum, and she was like, oh, I was really beautiful. And that really hit me. And yeah, I do have that sensitivity. I'm the one cheering the guy that's managed to get on the bus, that's run all the way to make it. And I'm also knew that I wanted to be a teacher. Got turned down by Bristol teacher training because they said your portfolio is too good, you're not going to be a teacher. But I started my work experience. I was doing that for work experience when I was 15. And I think through my history and my past and having that sensitivity that's obviously come through being a highly sensitive person, being born into the family that I'm born in, having ADHD as well, I was like, what would my mum's life have been like? How different would that have been if she'd had that confidence? And she never knew she had that power. And that's been such a driver for me, as well as all those things that are definitely the same. And it's like, can I just put this mirror up? Can I just show you what value you have? Can I just show you what you have to bring into this world? And going back to your question about how do I see those results, it's through that. It's like when artists say to me, I'm so much stronger than I thought, I'm so much wiser than I thought, or I'm so much more capable. And we can have all the tools or the templates or the blueprints around. And I think that's where mentoring almost needs a little bit more education. Is like we're not shadowing, artists aren't shadowing our practice. It's so much more than that. Yeah, that's been something that's been seen by other people, and people can talk to me and open up, and I love that. And yeah, I've always felt that with you too.
Which also really, again, re-illustrates the importance of community and tribe and positive relationships, because that's how you get a better understanding of self, other than, of course, spending time with yourself and observing. If you don't have the input of others around you.
Yeah, exactly. And that you're talking their language, giving them the sort of out-of-the-box thinking, which is really, really important. And that's something that I want to tap into. I even work with women around how their brains work differently at different times in the month, because that was coming up for artists. Prolific artists were not able to work, and we identified that it was down to the menstrual cycle. So, and that's something that I've worked and work with, because just before a new cycle, our brains communicate, the left and right side of the brain communicate for just a few days. So it's an amazing time for journaling. It's an amazing time to evaluate your work, because you kind of see things a lot clearly. That's why we have PMS, because it's like, oh, all the shit that I've just like put under the carpet all month I'm having to deal with now. It's like the curtains come down, So I find all of this stuff fascinating, and I know that you're really excited by neuroplasticity, epigenetics, and that just stuff like just lights my, it just gives me just like, yeah, shivers. I love it.
That's incredible what you said about the menstrual cycle. I'm very much going to be adding that as a consideration.
So I do a lot of work around that. I journal every day. I do transcendental meditation, which is low. It just shifted so much of my anxiety, so much calmer and clearer. But for me, I think currently, now you're asking me currently, I would say I've got a lot more peace around the practice that I have without that feeling of that quick turnaround. That's, I guess, why it's present and we're talking about it now. That's very new. It's really new. Yeah, I think it's just what I said as well. It's how important trust is, because we have this feeling. There's a couple of feelings that come up that are really present, and it's like this idea that we're behind, that we should be doing more than we're doing, and also if we stop, that it's almost like a physical thing that we just lose, or we can't reconnect with it. So that's really important. You needed to take 5 years off writing your book, and we have it in our hands, and it's an amazing piece of so much knowledge, so much learning. I'm absolutely loving it, and I've needed to take 5 years to, yeah, exactly, have that different part of being myself through shedding, which comes with a lot of negative beliefs, ancestral. This idea of, if you're a teacher, you're a failed artist, and I deal with that, a lot of issues around shame with artists that are a bit embarrassed sometimes to have a mentor, sometimes have a shame attached to, even though they have amazing skills, what people will think if they start mentoring as an artist. And it's really prevalent. Yeah, it's been terrifying at points, sort of taking my foot off the gas and not being a creative, but that I filled with just being full time. I want to be the best of the best of what I can do to support artists and see what's next. It's exciting. It has, but like you said earlier, it has to be a bit terrifying.
It does.
Or you're not really living, without sounding cliche. You need to kind of rise a little bit above that sense of just the idea of having a big scary vision is just so important.
Brilliant. Well, I could go all day talking to you, but I'm not going to keep it that long. But where do people need to go to find out more about your mentoring?
Okay, so I'm merging. So the mentoring is now on my website, which is still Misled Studio. It will be changing to Joanna Henly, but you can find the mentoring in either place. So it's joannahenly.co.uk, and it is dense with all the information about what my mission is, who I work with, how I work with them, and what the results are. And I'm on Instagram, mostly that really. And that's either joanna.henley or misled.studio, I believe.
Big congrats on getting to 5 years, because it's such a great milestone, and it's really inspiring to see too.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, very much so. And as ever, thank you for your time.
Thanks, man. It's so good to be here for number 3. I love it. Thank you so much. Always great to chat.
Yep, as ever.